Hello and welcome to the live stream of the new book for Going Live by Christoph Trappe. My name is Fred Faulkner. Thank you for joining me tonight. We're gonna have a great little conversation with an author, a friend that I've met through the interwebs over the years, and I'm really happy to help promote and kind of talk about this new book that he has coming out. So Christoph Trappe is a US-based digital branding strategist and creates content about story development, distribution, and audience engagement. A now four-time author, Christoph helps companies evolve editorial and marketing teams into content performance culture and uses the create once, publish everywhere, or the COPE model. Big fan of that. A speaker you've seen at conferences such as Content Marketing World and Content Marketing Summit, amongst many more. Please help me in welcoming Christoph Trappe to the According to Fred, the podcast. Christoph, thanks for coming to the show.
You bet, Fred. Hey, thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you on. I know we've talked before. I've been on your podcast. You've been on mine, still in editing development, but really excited to kind of actually have an opportunity to talk to you about your upcoming book. It's an important topic, I think. It's an interesting topic because it's an top of mind. Live streaming has picked up a lot of steam lately. We won't even get into the whole social audio component of what people are doing these days to kind of even create more content. But with the live streaming, and you've been doing podcasting for a while, so I really want to talk about this book, where it kind of came from, some advice and counsel you can give a lot of people out there about how to maximize their content creation. So let's get started.
Let's do it.
So let's start from the beginning. So you've been podcasting for a while now. As of this morning and the publishing of this, you're on episode 342. So over the last year, you've essentially been publishing almost like daily episodes. So how has your podcast journey evolved since you really started? And what do you feel is your strengths as a podcaster?
That's a fantastic question, especially. So I started that podcast maybe some years ago. And early on, it was really just me talking. And then I finally decided I need to have some guests on here. Who just wants to listen to me? Turns out not that many people. So it really started kicking off when I had more guests on the show. And you're right. In the last, probably since November to February, I published about daily, because I didn't want guests to wait for a long time for their show to go live. And I still kind of have that rule today. If I interview somebody today, that show will go live in the next month. Right. So that's the furthest I go out. So people don't have to wait forever and ever. There was one show I was on and it took them a year to publish. And I mean, a lot of stuff can happen in a year, so I want to be cognizant of that as well. But the reason I started in podcasting is because podcasting had like a second wind, so to speak. And I wanted to try it. I wanted to learn the technology. Most everything I do is about learning the new technology, trying different things, seeing what might work, seeing what doesn't work. And that's what I did. And guess what? A lot of different brands are now doing podcasts. There's so many different podcast channels out there, as you know, maybe like 20 different channels, maybe more, that, my podcast is on as well. And just like yours now, we have voice devices. We don't want to say their names because they'll just yell at me or play Britney Spears, which happened in a meeting the other day. Now playing sometimes from Britney Spears. And I'm like, because I said sometimes in a sentence, really? Yeah. So, but anyway.
We do have them always listening. I have one in my office. It definitely, the always on. I've definitely now seen more commercials where I'd be listening to something and next thing you know, it's like, boom, pops on. I'm all of a sudden hearing something that was referred to in a commercial. I thought they got better at that, but I guess not. So as the interview thing, I do solos as well. I've really been getting into the interview style of podcasts. I do think the interview style is a great medium. I think it just opens up a lot of ease in creating podcasts, but I do like that solo method sometimes too, because I do believe it gives me a voice, right? I mean, my particular show is called According to Fred. So by essence, it's a little bit of an opinionated show in and of itself. But I definitely need to kind of do some more on the solo things, but I do enjoy the interviews and talking to some really smart people. Let's talk about, as a content strategist, and I mentioned in the intro, you're a fan of the COPE model, so the create once, publish everywhere. Doing audio, getting into then blog posts or social, but now the video, is video really becoming the ultimate starting point for a COPE model in content strategies today?
Well, some people would argue that that's not the case, but I would argue that it is the case. And here's the reason why, because I'm a content guy. So if you want to call me an expert, maybe at content, maybe at content marketing, but I'm never an expert at any of the other stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like what a company actually does. or what whoever does, right? I'm not an expert at that. So the way I get the content to use, I have to talk to the experts at the company. And that's usually not me. And the way I used to do that, and the way my teams used to do it all the time, we would go talk to experts, we would record them, and then we would write articles about it. Sometimes we ghostwrite them, sometimes we would write like a news article or whatever, that kind of thing. And today, I think you can just do that with a live stream, and you can maximize the content that you have going on, right? So for example, if I work with a large healthcare system, I go do a live stream with a doctor, I interview them, it's live, it's on video, and we already shared it to who knows how many, hundreds of people before we did any other work. And I think that's a fantastic way to make use of that model.
Now, with live streaming, though, as anything else, when you're live, something can screw up, right? I can mess up the broadcast. I can pull you out of this show if I click on a wrong button. At the same time, people can't go back and repeat an answer because it's live. Now, in a regular podcast or a regular video, when you're doing it off live, you have that opportunity to kind of really create more of a polished component, a polished product at the end of the day. Do you feel the live brings another level of authenticity, or is it really the polished video that sells it? I mean, there's probably two schools of thought. I'm sure either are probably correct, but what's your position, thought on authenticity of live versus polished and produced?
So I am not opposed to polish your podcast and polish your content, and quite frankly, like with my book, I mean, there's so many edits that went through there. It looks pretty good, the formatting and everything. I got a copy earlier, and I'm skimming through it on paper for really the first time, and there is something to be said about that. But on the other hand, if we don't publish, it will never perform. And I'm telling you one thing, I think people overthink what polish means. I'll give you an example. The podcast episode that you mentioned earlier, I screwed up on that. And I made maybe one of my biggest mistakes, and not on purpose to use it tonight, but it just happened. So we did an Amazon Live and a LinkedIn Live, whatever. And so I moved it over and I put it in the slot, and I didn't edit it. I think what happened, actually, Fred, I think I forgot. I think I just put it there as a placeholder. I was going to go back and I was going to edit it, and I didn't do it. So it published because the time came. And at the beginning, there's this long pause. You know how you have the countdown? So the countdown, except there was no countdown, there was just silence for 30 seconds, was on there. And I edited it after the fact when I caught it, when I was sharing it. So at some point, it'll be updated on all the different channels. It wasn't right away. But, did anybody notice? Probably. Did people still listen? Yes. Did anybody email me? No. Was it the highest performing episode ever? No. Was it pretty close? It wasn't horrible. When I looked at the numbers, I'm like, it's almost like nobody even noticed. They still listen. So I'm not laughing at it. I think we should produce high quality content, but we also can't overthink it. I'll give you an example. There's articles, I can tell you that they will never perform in SEO. And you know how I know? Because you're not publishing them. The end. Stuff will only perform if you publish it. Same with live streams, same with podcasts, same with articles, same with books. Is this book going to become a bestseller? Heck, I don't know. But, at least I can say I got a book on the topic now, so we'll see.
And that's a great segue into actually the topic. So, obviously you decided that through your experience, and you've done a lot of experimentation. You and I've talked about this back and forth over the last couple of months as you've been experimenting with this as well. So live streaming and taking your podcast to the next level. So the new book is called Going Live. It's based on basically your experiences of moving into a live streaming model into your content strategy. This is actually my first LinkedIn Live. I decided to take the plunge. I started to do live podcasts. I decided to say, yep, I'm going to go apply for LinkedIn. Got it within a week. So I now have to add it into my strategy. And really, when I think about all my different outlets, LinkedIn's probably a more logical place for me to be doing these types of podcasts and these types of conversations than Facebook anyways. So I'm excited about this as a new platform for me. But at the same time, you've been experimenting with this and many more platforms, Twitch, Amazon, as you talked about. So how has your live streaming evolved, and what do you see the benefits from doing it?
Yeah, so it continuously evolves and there's always new channels. So I didn't even know Amazon Live was a thing until right before Thanksgiving. And I had Jim Fuchs and Chris Stone, they were on the show. They talked to me about it and they said, oh, yeah, you need to go live on Black Friday and, whatever, Cyber Monday and all that stuff. And it didn't really work because I wasn't at the right level, but stuff always evolves. I did do Twitch for a while and, nobody really watched, but I was able to say, oh, yeah, I'm streaming to Twitch. Twitter performs pretty well. LinkedIn performs pretty well. And now the latest thing I noticed is, and I know you did it too. I'd be interested to hear your experience if you want to share it. Scheduling lives on LinkedIn is a whole nother level of engagement because, let's say I got a few hundred people seeing the schedule post, and then you have maybe half of that or whatever watching the show, maybe even less than that. So my point is, even the scheduling of the live, there's value, even if they don't watch, because you can stay in front of people. So it's kind of an interesting mix on how that works.
Well, I'm interested to see what the what the results are going to be for this, regardless, and it's something I'm definitely going to continue to do. The scheduling live is interesting because now you have to, like everything else, I think about YouTube and others, like you got to think of a thumbnail and what's going to be the most attractive thing you want to get people to engage. Is it going to look too cheeky? It revolves around your brand and how you present yourself, and the scheduling part I think is gonna be interesting. I do like to give people a heads up. When I first posted about this, definitely numbers and a couple hundreds were people looking. When I did the reminder kind of today, it's like 6, and I don't know if that's just the algorithm of like you're sharing your own content, so LinkedIn isn't going to promote it as much in the whole stream of the consciousness of what your feeds are, but it will be interesting to see. I'm excited to see what the experiment's going to look like and where that kind of goes. So let's jump into, I want to talk about Amazon Live for a second because we've had a couple chuckles around this. So Amazon Live, and I'm going to pull this up, is something that you've been, here's your book, but here's Amazon in general. So we'll talk about the book in here in a second, but Amazon Live for you is actually something that you've done, and you've actually streamed like your vacuum, which I think is kind of funny. It actually is really funny that you've actually done it, but there's been a true benefit out of this, right? Because you are, you're looking at different products, and this isn't just the only one that you do, but you're showing people, creating content that is going to be associated with a product. And like a lot of content creators, you have affiliate links and other things that are going through that you've made money by doing some of this stuff. Like this is actually providing, is maybe not your core audience, but at the same time, it's content you're creating is through a live channel. So what's been your experience around Amazon Live, things like this particular video, which you've done a couple times? Benefits from this? Is it just a fun thing to do, or what's your kind of philosophy around Amazon Live specifically when it comes to user generated content on products?
Yeah, it's interesting. And the other thing, if you want to go back, I know I told you I was go to the other tab there, the Amazon Live one, and go down. There's another one I want to show you. So right there, office setup and podcast studio in one. So I live stream. So that, as you can see, that's like an hour long, right? And I think I had a meeting. That's why I had to turn it off, but go up for a second. So basically, I'm just live streaming me working. And most everything you can see in that, so I'm just there. That's me. I'm working. That's all I'm doing. I'm not doing anything else. I respond to questions on the iPad Pro, but same thing with the vacuum cleaner. It's just driving around the house. It's cleaning. I'm streaming it. I put a tripod on it. And basically, there's thousands of people watching it, and every time they click on anything, you get a little commission, and sometimes they buy the product, sometimes they buy other products. So I think, first of all, it's interesting because I learn how to do different things. I learn how to see what works, and I can tell you one thing that I really think works on Amazon Live and maybe on other channels. It's the length. You have to stream forever and ever to get people to pay attention. Like I had one earlier, we did a live stream where we were just talking and, I had like, I don't know, 1,500 people watching, but it really started going up at the end, because you were live, Amazon, maybe they noticed you were serious about it and more people were showing up. In fact, it's so hard for me when I see the numbers ticking up at the end to stop, because it's like, you're like, well, should we really leave? We have like a really good audience. What else can we talk about? And we just keep talking. Same with the vacuum cleaner. I did that the other day, and you can see it behind me. It's sitting back there currently resting, waiting for his tomorrow's episode. But I ran it down here, and this is like the basement where I have my office. Right. It's not a super huge area of the house, But like the other day I was working and I just ran it, and I think it was on Saturday morning actually, and I was doing something, and my wife says, "That's taken that vacuum cleaner a long time to clean." I'm like, "Oh, and it's ran like 6 times." And
The downstairs is really clean now. Don't worry, we can
It
eat
is.
off of it because I was vacuumed 3 times already, 6 times exactly.
It is, but you know, there was like 3,000, 4,000 people watching, and I'm like, I'm not gonna turn it off, you know. And I mean, at some point, you do have to pull the plug on the thing. It's but yeah, so it did run, 5 or 6 times.
Interesting. So, all right, back to the book. I mean, the interesting thing about you experimenting with live streaming and different things is certainly fun. And I would argue, one thing we joked about is, is Amazon Live the new QVC? Like, I don't know, right? But I do find it interesting that Amazon's taking advantage of user generated content in a very new way. It used to be just like, here's pictures of the product you can see on a product page. Now they're evolving into, you can do video, you can do, you can answer questions in real time. That's certainly, not the same thing as live streaming a podcast. So let's transition to that. So live streaming a podcast, it's a new vehicle, it's a new medium. People definitely prefer, voice, and then there's the visual. So how have you adapted visual component, right, to your audio? Forget the polished thing that we talked about before, but like now this is like, there's a setup, right? We have cameras, we have lighting, we have that, picture we were just showing of your office. You have a ring light, you have multiple cameras. What's the mindset of now bringing live streaming into your process?
Yeah, so of course you can literally just have the podcast like you do it for audio, except you do it on video, right? And there is certainly a level, there is like a barrier of, if you're just talking, what are you going to show? Like, is there something to show? I would never ask people to bring PowerPoints on the podcast. Oh my God, I don't want to see any more PowerPoints if I don't have to. But
Right.
you can bring visuals. So this afternoon I had Tara Hunt on the show, and they actually have like a branding deck, like cards, like personalities for brands, like it's called Who the Deck or something like that. And so she literally, I said, well, I want to be honest. She goes, that's kind of too safe. I'm like, okay, what's less safe? And she goes, blunt. I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of strong. And then I said, but how do you, balance that out to be a little softer? So she had all these cards and she just showed the cards. So you can still watch it and get the same from it. But it was kind of a nice touch, on the video, to be a little bit more visual about it. For the most part, I would really recommend not to overthink it, but you can have up lower thirds. I mean, you do that all the time on here. You get your podcast logo on my podcast, and you put that up going live stream your podcast to reach more people. But you can do other lower thirds. Like sometimes I put like Anchor, which is what I use to edit my podcast, has like a call-in feature, so people can call in, leave a voicemail. So now I flash that at the bottom, and sometimes I just talk about it. I'm like, oh, if you want to leave a message, if you have a question, well, we can't answer the question right now, but we can answer on the podcast. So right. Things like that that you can do.
So that's what you're doing with yours. Now we have a platform with like LinkedIn Live. I'm using StreamYard as my publishing platform. I think you use Restream and some other tools too. And we'll talk about the stacks that we're using in a second. But I have an opportunity, and if someone wants to drop in a question on either Twitter or YouTube or LinkedIn, I'll see that in real time, and we can answer that in real time. So while the days of like the DJ where you can phone in and we're going to bring you in the queue and have a live conversation, there's somewhat of that coming on board now with the idea of comments. Have you ever experienced doing that type of engagement with your audience on your live streaming?
Yeah, so the comments is by far the easiest. I haven't done the call-in thing yet. I know I've seen people do that before. They were more like audio live streams, I guess. But what's really cool, I don't know if you can do it on StreamYard. I think you can. On Restream, when somebody comments, you can flash the comment on the screen, and then you can just talk about it. So it's kind of cool to do that. The way I have it set up, you actually can do that because I use Switcher Studio to Restream, and then Restream pushes it to all the different channels. If I was using one or the other, I could do that. So, but yeah, I always respond to comments. And earlier, I did a show, I think it was yesterday, Scott Dykers, he's the founding editor of The Onion, and he just published how to write funny characters. And I was responding to comments on LinkedIn. and Amazon Live. And I said, okay, this person said that. And then we like talked about it, so totally always acknowledge people. I think people appreciate it, and people, they'll come back and they'll keep sharing. And there was one person even on that live stream that said, oh, I just bought the book. And then he goes, oh, but which one? Because we just talked about the old book. And she goes, oh, I bought the old book. Do I have to buy them both? And, it's just like you just have a fun conversation. It's kind of cool.
I think that definitely brings a different dynamic to podcasting. And again, podcasts have different, depending on what you want to accomplish out of it. Live is a different vibe. Live is, we can have this interaction. We can bring people in. If someone wants to comment, I could throw it up. We can have that engagement with someone in the real time. And there's some great shows that are, now out there. You almost like think of it as a show versus, and not that you don't think of a podcast as a show, because you do, but they just have a different dynamic and vibe to it versus, just audio where you can be very formulaic if you need to. And here's my intro, and here's my big first section. Here's maybe my advertisements or my promotions and sponsorships in the middle. I'm going to go to the second section, and then we're going to cut to the outro, and it's done. And that's your formula, right? And doing live gives you the opportunity to kind of, call an audible and have an interaction and things you don't necessarily get to have in just the normal podcast format, which then leads me to this other question. So do you have to think about, you said don't overthink live streaming, but do you have to think about kind of how you're going to do things differently because of the dynamic element of what live streaming brings to the table?
Yeah. So what's interesting about that question, Fred, is some people accuse me I make it sound too simple, and maybe I am. It is the first few times you do it, and even for me today, it is still pretty stressful. I mean, I don't know what you're doing over there, right? But you're pushing buttons. You're trying to listen, then you try to talk, then you try to do other things. So there's like a lot of stuff going on.
Things like that, exactly, on the fly.
Yeah. So there is actually a lot going on, especially if you do everything yourself. So if you have somebody on the team who can do like the production, I actually do that on the Vox Pop Me podcast. I do all the production and they do all the talking. And that's basically it. I just push the buttons, but that makes it a lot easier. So you do have to plan a little bit, and you also have to think about the flow. What are you going to talk about? What's the topic? It's okay to go off on tangents. I think that's totally fine. I think it's totally fine to do that. I did it on a show the other day. They asked me a question about how I was doing something, which was kind of interesting, right? On TV, you would never talk about that. And I just answered. I was like, oh yeah, here's how we do that. Okay, cool. And then one time I had two guests and I had a different setup. And I just said, all right, we're starting with everybody on screen and I'm on air, right? Because It was too difficult to get them all back on here after I set it up. And then I got to move them out of the way. Too difficult. We're going to get started. Here they are. So try to pick your battles. What are you going to make easier? What are you going to kind of deal with? I've unmuted the wrong people before. I've pushed the wrong buttons before. I pushed up the wrong lower thirds before. Whatever, like I told you the thing earlier with the podcast, you will make mistakes, but you still have to think about it. You still want to think about the flow. What are you going to talk about? What's the topic? And then also make sure the guests understand, if you have guests, what the format is. I'll give you an example. I have some guests who, when I forgot to mention it, they think it's really just an interview, right? But what you said earlier too, you said, this is according to Fred. Like, I'm going to have some opinions. Same here. I want to share some stories. If I'm just here to interview you, you don't need me. We can just put up the questions on screen and you can talk and push the buttons when you want the question. Do you know what I mean? So just something to think about is it is still difficult. Jason Falls, he is the first one who said this to me. There's 49 dominoes that have to fall. Most are out of your control. So, relax, take it easy, make a plan, go. Don't be rattled by something not working.
That's good advice, because it's easy to get rattled. And you're right. I'm pushing buttons. I'm trying to highlight you and try and still ask questions and think about things at the same time. Constantly watching if people are actually watching and not trying to get anxiety if that number is 0, but knowing that this is something, again, it's a product afterwards. So it's going to live on. As soon as I'm done, it sits on YouTube and Twitter and now LinkedIn, and it's going to be something that someone could watch later. So that's the other thing, right? It's you create once and you publish everywhere. When you publish, it's there. Like, we could do this live, but now I have a product that can live out there, and I can still go back and edit and take it and do some other fun things with it and slice it, out if I need to. But now it's there. It's published, which is, to your point, get it done. Don't overthink it. What does someone need to kind of have to get started with live streaming? I think we can, there's some obvious things. You need to have a camera. Get it, is your laptop camera good enough? Do you need to invest in something a little more higher end? We have microphones. There's headphones. Like, can you get away with AirPods? Like, what's your best practice as far as entry level just to get yourself started versus maybe saying if you're going to get serious, you might want to make some investments in what?
This is all you need to get started, your iPhone or whatever. If you're an Android guy like you, your Android, I guess that, if you want to buy equipment, go for it. A microphone certainly would be nice. A big ring light would be nice. I got a 4K camera, it's still looking good, even though it's dark out. That would be nice, but don't use them as excuses for not starting. You do not need this fancy mic to get started. I didn't even have this mic until before Christmas. I didn't even have that camera until before Christmas. That ring light, I used to have a little bitty one, and I finally showed that to somebody, and she said, "Oh, you got a little bitty ring light." That was not exactly her tone, but that's kind of how I took it. And I'm like, yeah, it is kind of a little bitty ring light. I mean, if I want to be serious about this, I bet I get a real one. So now it's like an 18-inch ring light, that's giving me a headache if I'm on air too long. But I know I can turn it down. So my point is, you can buy equipment like that, and you probably should, but I didn't have it when I first started, and you don't need it. My best performing podcast episode ever had 43,000 downloads, and it was recorded me sitting on my couch with my iPhone. And it was a topic that I didn't even think was that interesting. And I don't know, it took off. So it's just something to think about. If you're thinking the equipment will save you, it won't. It's going to help you. And then once you have equipment, by the way, you have to think about new things. For example, I'm giving myself currently a headache a little bit because it feels like I'm screaming into this mic. And then I'm reminded that I'm not supposed to scream because it just picks it up just fine. Do you know what I'm saying? So You have to think about all those different things anyways. And then how do you put the light? So as you can see, I got glasses on. And even if I take my head off, it's still not in my lenses, right? Because it's so much higher and I don't really look at it directly. I don't like looking at my bald head, so that's why I wear a hat. But at the end of the day, you have to think about all those things. So every time you get any new piece of equipment, you have to think about, where do you put the camera? Do you put it there? Do you like that framing? But it's going to get easier and easier and cheaper, honestly, to do. And as long as you have a phone, you can start with that.
Yeah. I mean, certainly you have to think about all the visual elements because with podcasting, it's as long as you have a microphone, you're good to go. And people will record a podcast in their closet because it dampens the noise and the echo ability. And that just, makes it easier. And with video, obviously you have to think about, like you said, you have to think about your set. You got to think about lighting. You got to think about a few other things, and not necessary, but we also know if there's a little bit good production value, people will stay engaged enough. And then the content helps carry it through. Content can carry you, but sometimes I think at the end of the day, people will also have an engagement level if you're animated or if you think about things, present yourself in different ways, or, and in my case, I'm, throwing in screens here, or we're talking to you and highlighting you. So it's, it is a production value for sure. So,
I do agree with that, Fred. And the other thing is too, the other thing people have to remember, the more brands do podcasts, when your audio is terrible, that's going to be a quick strike against you. And I do that all the time. When I listen to a podcast, and I got 12 podcasts I want to listen to, and the first 2 have bad audio, I move on. Don't have time.
It's true, for sure. So what tips do you have for anyone who's thinking about getting into live streaming as part of their content strategy? We've talked about a few just kind of things here and there, but give us a couple solid tips of, if you're going to embed live streaming into your content strategy, you have to think about what?
Yeah, make it a commitment, first of all. So figure out how often you're going to go live, once a week, once every other week, whatever it might be. So I'll give you an example, and that is not debatable. So if you go live every week, that's 52 times in a year. And it doesn't make any difference if you're on vacation. You know what you're going to do? You go live the week before twice. So you're going to hit that number. Now, stuff will happen. Somebody might cancel. So, you got to deal with it and kind of roll with it sometimes. But from your end, you always have to plan something. And maybe you do a solo live stream at that time. Then figure out, where do you go? What channels? LinkedIn is a little bit harder to get into. So congratulations, Fred, to being approved. Not everybody gets approved. So that's awesome. And figure out the channels, YouTube, Neil Schaefer tells me, is YouTube deprioritizes live stream. So that's why we don't see very many views on the live stream. However, he agreed with me, and I agree with him, is you're still on YouTube now. So once you're not live anymore, you're just a video, right? So the content is still there, and you kind of took away the whole ordeal of having to upload it, right? Because it's already there. And now in YouTube, just like LinkedIn, you can trim the video after the fact. So you can trim out the 30 seconds at the beginning. You can add a card. You can do other things. Very similar on LinkedIn. And then start, and also integrate it with your podcast. So there should be no live streams that are not also turning into a podcast episode. That's a little bit of a learning curve for executives, right? So you got to kind of feel them out, especially if you do it for your company. How do they feel about things? Do they have to approve everything? What I found usually is if they agree to do a live stream, they already know what was said, right? So it's not that big of a deal anymore.
Our PR department can't come back and say, like, you got to cut that out. Like, it's live. Right. It went.
It's like, already live.
It's gone.
Right.
Exactly.
So, but I think those are the biggest tips. And then just start, and also think about, where do you put on your website? How do you highlight it? How do you promote it? But at the end of the day, they're not going to be perfect. Just start. Just do it. I mean, I know I hate to say that slogan, it's kind of cliche, but at the end of the day, you just have to get started, and sometimes it's going to be great, and sometimes it's going to be and sometimes it's going to take off,
Yeah. What's your thought on, and this is, again, I'm harping on the cope thing, but this is definitely something that I've thought about as I've thinking about what my content strategy is and how I'm going to use video. But then I've seen a lot of podcasters that also now do the live thing, right? So you think of the Joe Rogans and the H3s and some of these other, I mean, everyone's got a podcast out there that they're doing live, or they're doing a video version of it. But I find, if you think the Joe Rogan model, where like he does the 3-hour podcast, but he has a whole separate channel that's just about clips. It's like the 5-minute sections here and the 5-minute section there. And like, that's a whole other set of stream of content that you can now repurpose in several different ways. And I think about that, with creating, interviews, like, is there something, like, I got to think really smart about questions now, because now can I think about the content that I want to get after the fact and slice it 5 different ways. I got the long form. I got maybe the 3 questions in a row that could be action. We can repurpose some way. There's the one single question that can repurpose to be a special way. That, I think, from a content strategy perspective, becomes a very different dynamic than maybe just podcasting, where, I mean, you still probably want to have that same strategy with podcasting as well, if you're thinking about from an interview, but from a solo standpoint, I'm just gonna talk. Maybe I have to really think about my narrative and my outline and all the things that go with that, because that then gives you the repurposability of content.
Exactly right. And so when I come up with questions and even the flow of my shows, I think about, what am I trying to rank for? What am I going to write about? What am I going to use for something else? And Andy Crestadina is probably the one that's currently harping this the most, of Orbit Media Studios. And he says, people need to stop writing content. You just need to update all the stuff you've written over the last 5 years. And he does have a point. I still think you got to write new content, but there's a lot of shows. Like, I have a long article on creativity. I don't need any more articles on creativity. I just need to update that old article with everything new, and then just repurpose it and republish it. So just something to keep in mind. The other thing, if you make it all part of one stream, you do want to ask the right questions. You want to keep that in mind as you're working on it. But here's total transparency. Not every live stream turns into an article. So for example, I was just looking at a couple weeks, I think it's the last week in March, and I have a live stream every single day that week, right? And I know I told you I was going to slow down, and I still got 1 a day. So I'm not slowing down that much, from 2 to 1. But anyway, so I got 1 a day. Here's the reality. I'm not going to write an article about every live stream that week, right? So I'm thinking of them and looking, okay, what am I going to reuse, if anything? What am I going to use somewhere else? Sometimes it's as easy, if I already have a 5,000 word article or whatever, 4,000, 3,000 word article on a topic, and I got a new live stream, sometimes I can just embed that live stream in that article. Like, do you know what I'm saying? That's like the easiest solution to repurpose it. So don't overthink it, and just kind of keep that in mind. What content do you already have? Where can you update? What do you have to create new? And sometimes if you're really just off the rails here, and you're talking about totally unrelated things, maybe there isn't much there to write an article. Maybe it's a good show, but it's not a good article. That's okay too.
And maybe that is okay, because sometimes maybe the video is going to be more the right platform for the content than a written article is anyways. I mean, maybe maybe the Publish Everywhere is one channel. It's not 10 channels or 3 channels. You can still have video and socialize it and still promote what you have, but it maybe isn't written worthy. You got a really good point.
But think about it this way too. So right now we're on 3 channels already. So there's no such thing anymore as just one channel, right? I mean, even if you don't do anything else, you already hit 3 channels.
Right. That's very true. That's very true. Well, Christoph, so the book comes out when? It's coming out soon. It's not out yet, right? Still pre-order?
Well, technically, if you guys are watching, you can get it right now. Officially, the official launch day is March 10th, but you can literally go on there right now and order it. See, I just got my copy. Looks pretty good. Looks as good as I can with that bald head. 210 pages of everything from strategy to technology to mindset to all the different things that you need to think about. So yep, hope you check it out.
So authenticstorytelling.net is Christoph's website. You can also find him on Amazon. So just search for Going Live Livestream. I'm sure it's a great set of keywords. Will pull it up, or Christoph Trappe. Be sure to make sure you look at all of his books, because he's got a number of them out there, including the one previous to this, a future podcast that I'm going to be publishing. We talked about this earlier. Content performance culture. You might see a theme here: storytelling, content, live streaming. Christoph's whole mantras around content strategy, using content to best your brand, bring it to life. Christoph Trappe, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you helping me break in LinkedIn Live and doing something this evening. It's been a really great time.
You bet. Appreciate you, Fred. Thanks for making the time. Thanks for having me on. And always nice to do a new channel, break in a new channel for you, so to speak. A new
channel. That's right. All right. Well, we'll talk soon. And thank you again. Thanks for everyone for joining live. We'll see you again later this week when I'm talking about my thoughts and reasons on why you should be going to Adobe Summit 2021 in virtual land. I have some thoughts and opinions. We're going to bring that to you guys on Thursday. Thanks a lot. Have a great night.